right near the river.
Right, Myrtle Street, Myrtle and Euclid.
What was the river like at that time?
At that time, it was wild. And I'm thinking back, at the area around the Pearl, because we just lived about a block and a half away from there.
I grew up on the east side. Basically, my father was a soldier, sergeant in the Army. He was stationed permanent party at Fort Sam Houston. But in second grade, while my father was in Vietnam, we moved to Eastwood Village, which is on the other side of this forested area here.
When we were kids, the lake was much different. I grew up just about 4 blocks on the other side there up there towards Hamilton Street.
I was born and raised on the south side. Both sets of my grandparents, my maternal and paternal grandparents, are from the south side.
We're right outside the house that I grew up in, and this is where I grew up. This is how I, connected to nature growing up. I mean, it was basically all around me. And my grandpa would play with me a lot, and that's all we would do is just, go and walk on the railroad tracks and, walk to my grandma's house, my abuelita's house down there, and yeah, so I was just always outside.
Well, I grew up in the northeast side of San Antonio, off I-35 in Redmond, maybe 3 or 4 miles down the street from here, and went to public school. Grew up sort of in the inner city area, but also at a meeting point of multiple neighborhoods.
I've been coming to Woodlawn Lake Park since I was about 5 years old, and we would come for, maybe every weekend to the playground. My dad was a big nature enthusiast, and we'd come and watch the birds and go to the other, the casting pool on the other side too. So I just remember it, since I was very little.
Sometimes we look at these lakes and just think of them as runoff and, flood suppression and flood control. But this is really natural for human beings to live near the water. That's why people came to San Antonio, and they stayed because of the water.
We had a lot of freshwater springs along our creeks. Those were covered up with concrete in the interest of abating the flooding. But I've still heard stories that there are springs under Elmendorf Lake. This morning I was out looking at some that had been covered by concrete just north of here. People told us that they used to use that water for drinking, bathing, washing clothes, doing all kinds of things. Not too long ago, people didn't have inside electricity, inside running water, inside plumbing, so they had to do things like that.
And the creek, and I don't even know what the name of the creek was, but the creek was right there, and most of the times, like most creeks around the area around here, are dry, except every time it would rain. And if it rained a lot, it would flood, and the water, if it rained a lot, the water would just kind of rise all the way up to my grandma's house. In fact, she claimed that one time that one of the reasons why my uncle was a Downs boy was on the account that she used to think that it was on the account that he got so scared about the flood waters that made him Downs.
She was pregnant, you mean?
Right.
That she got susto or?
Yeah, that she got afraid and scared. That's the reason why, she would say, oh, well, that's the reason why, he would flood, and they would have the water out there at their doorsteps, and if not in there, in the house itself. But I mean, the house itself sat way up high. It was way up high, and the creek was way on down over here, and there was a ball field over here, and the street ran up. It was all just rock streets, and the house was up here, and you can just imagine all of the water that must have had in the creek to really rise up as high as that.
we had this place that we all loved as children. It was called White Mountain, and really basically what it was this forested area, which is actually quite expansive, and we would say to each other, let's go to White Mountain, and we would walk down this long street, passing dozens of houses, and then we cut through this alley at the end of that long street, and after a couple of blocks we would come to this rock shale formation. It was white shale. We called it White Mountain, and what it did was it sort of led us down into this recessed forested area that you see around you right now. And we used to make big events out of it. We used to go down and climb down White Mountain and just play in the forest all day long. We'd look for pecans, look for berries. We'd swing from trees. We'd swing in. We'd swim in the lake. in the creek, what we called, I think it was Salado Creek, and my older brothers would go fishing, and it was just a great magical place that we loved as children, where we would spend all day exploring nature. It was just a very, very special place for us growing up in this urban environment.
And then my initial connection to nature, not necessarily plants, I'd have to give credit to my mom, who worked with livestock in urban agriculture, horses, goats, chickens, so I was on a farm from a young age, at a very young age. I remember one year for like show and tell, I think we brought some horses to school, right?
I was always an animal lover as a child growing up. My paternal grandmother was also an avid animal lover, so I think we shared that passion. She would teach me about different plants outside, all the history, the medicinal properties. So she was very much a big influence as to why I have this love of animals and nature.
I do remember, one of the things that I remember a lot about my grandpa was he really loved the chili piquins, and he would make salsa out of. He worked at Picnic Foods, and he would make the salsa at Picnic from the chili piquins that he would harvest here. So every time I see a chili piquin when I'm out walking around, I'm like, oh cool, my grandpa's here.
Over there, you've got the 24th Street Bridge that crosses the Apache Creek at Elmendorf Lake. That was our fishing hole when I was growing up. During the week, we were enrolled in school, but that didn't stop us. We'd come out fishing before school. We had our fishing line tied onto a little twig, basically, with a hook on the end. We'd use my mother's tortilla masa as bait. So we'd pinch off a glob of it and come out and use that for bait and catch mainly perch, because that was the size of fish that we could catch. It was catch and release. Of course, we'd go into school so we couldn't keep them, but we'd go to school smelling like fish. On weekends, though, my dad would bring us back out fishing here at the lake and on some of the creeks, and we'd catch perch again, and he wanted to eat them, though. So he would scrape the scales off, cut the heads and tails off, fillet them. So these were little perch, so there was hardly anything left. So he would go out back, and my mom wouldn't let him cook inside because he'd make his smelly menudo and stuff like that. So he had a burner way out back that he would use to cook. So he'd put some frying oil on there and get these little pieces of perch and fry them up, and they would come out looking like potato chips. So rather than fish and chips, we had fish chips that my dad would love to make.
And then we would walk down to the river and then fish there. We never caught much. We didn't have any worms at the time because we couldn't find worms because it was always dry outside, and we would try to dig into the ground, into the dirt to see if we could find any. And so we would use like bread. We would use bread and maybe weenies. we would cut those up and we would just put those on our hook.
Especially my oldest brother, Bobby, he was a big fisherman, and he would come with his fishing pole, and he'd go to one part of the creek where it was deeper, and he'd fish, and he'd actually come back with all kinds. He would come back with perch, he would come back with bass, those were the big days, and sometimes he would even find like gar. And then also we would often we'd stumble across, old Mexican immigrant men who would come down to hunt with their little rifles to hunt for rabbits and all other, I guess, I don't know what else. I remember rabbits because I have a distinct memory of one man with his rifle and carrying about 3 rabbits. So I knew that that's what they were hunting.
Anecdotally, we've had stories of people who would harvest fish, crawfish, freshwater shrimp, frogs, turtles, all of that. They would make soup. They would use it, cut it up and use it with rice to make it stretch further, because most of us had large families out here. Harvesting plants, watercress, lettuce, cabbage, potatoes, garlic, onion, all of those were harvested from along the creeks, and people have told me stories about those. Yeah, that's what they would do. They would take them home and eat them.
One year, there were some chickens that escaped from his side of the yard, and at first there was just like 1, and there was like 2 and 3, and there was like a whole flock of chickens back there, and I would just go and they would follow me around everywhere, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm the chicken like lady or whatever, I don't know. It was just really nice. Like I felt like they were like my little like flock that would just follow me everywhere. And so it was mainly my dad that introduced, the concept of like birding. He had binoculars. He'd point out, the different ducks and the different birds specifically in this neighborhood. And I remember my first bird that I would remember that I remembered every time I would see it, I would know what kind of bird it was. And it's the gray blue heron, which I actually see right over there on the other side of the bank over there. Because my dad would always say, he's like, so that bird is about 3 feet tall. And because I was about 5 years old, that's about how tall I was. So he's like, the bird is about the size of you. And I would always think how giant this bird was, like compared to me. And yeah, and I just, from there, that was, then I would slowly kind of recognize other birds.
So the environment, though, it was crippled. It's coming back. We're bringing it back. And the idea is that we're all part of this mosaic. And it's fitting that we're here with these beautiful benches that are covered with Oscar Alvarado's mosaics, in that we should fit into nature as part of the mosaic, not try and control it and dominate it and be something else. You're doing this for students. I'd recommend a book, The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris, which puts us in perspective how we fit into nature.
When we talk about Mexican, if I go back to pre-European Mexican culture was, and this is what I teach to my students, that it was very circular. And what I mean by that is that everything is connected, right? So we're connected with nature. Nature, we're all together. We're not above nature, right? We need nature, right? We have indigenous communities that honor nature, right? Because they know that we need nature more than it needs us, really. Including the animals and the trees, right? We need that. That's a necessity. So for me, that's also, our worldview of how we see nature, right, is very significant, because we have in ancient Mexican philosophy, right, and religion, it was everybody and everything is connected.
I think I'm starting to realize that, you can be a birder just looking at the birds from in your yard, in your backyard. There's a lot of, activism happening because of, the displacement of different birds and their, the nature, their natural habitats. But it's, I hope to see more people getting involved, in those issues.
Whoever's watching this, I hope They realize that whether it's about birds or whether it's about insects or whether it's about soil or whether it's about plants or air quality or water conservation, whatever STEM, earth science, physical science, engineering, right, literature, like there's all these different humanities and sciences that are integrated into this work that we're doing, right? And so don't think, oh, I'm not a scientist, so I can't be a gardener. Or, I'm not a videographer, so I can't, make informational videos about the work that I'm doing, right? So like, just start where you are. We have a big mountain to climb, but, we have to take that first step. And I think San Antonio is in a position to take those steps, but it's going to take a critical mass of people speaking up, showing up, doing it, to say, hey, we can do it. We can make this happen. And then it'll become, like an avalanche that'll just continue to go for the future and for what we need to do right now.
And I would really hope that someday one of the criteria for being mayor of San Antonio is that they must fish and eat the fish they caught from Elmendorf Lake.